Hello, hi, I'm Linz. Welcome so much to my YouTube video. I am ready to do MTG in 2023. We're gonna talk about what the best decks are right now, or at the end of 2022, going into 2023, what is looking good. But before we get into that, I do want to say thank you so much. I started this whole little adventure of streaming and making YouTube videos this year, just kind of as a fun little outlet, and it's been extremely enjoyable and I've had way more success than I expected. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, let's get into the good stuff. So first up, I want to talk about one of the decks that has granted me the most success in the last 6-ish months. I've been playing this pretty steady, and that is Mono Black. So, there are stable cards that are always in every mono black deck, but I also broke this down into two flavors, the aggro and control version of this deck. So there have been and currently are two flavors of mono black that do very well. So we'll take a quick run through of what makes them so good. Let's start with the staples though. Okay, first off, Liliana of the Veil. She's a 3-cost planeswalker, absolutely amazing. -2, target player sacrifices a creature. If by odd chance you get to do her ultimate of -6, you can separate all target players' permanents into 2 piles, and they have to sacrifice one of those piles. I absolutely love doing this against control decks because they usually don't worry about your planeswalker and they kind of like let it linger unless they have a specific way to get rid of it, especially if you have other things going on. They like worry about it the least, and I've definitely caught them with this ultimate and it's brutal. It totally sets everybody back. So very good card. All right, next up, Invoke Despair. Everybody running black is trying to squeeze this card into their deck. I even see Grixis decks, that's 3-colored decks, running the Invoke Despairs because it's that good. So this is a 4 blue and then 1 colorless cost. So you need to have a lot of black mana in the deck. But you can have target opponent sacrifice creature. If they can't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. And then you can repeat that for enchantment and planeswalker. So the utility on this card is kind of unreal. For 5 mana, you can remove 3 things off the board. If they don't have anything off the board, you get to do 6 damage and draw 3 cards, and depending on what they have, somewhere in between. So it's basically giving you value in either removal or draining opponent's life and giving you draw. So absolutely fantastic card. It's the best 5-drop probably out there, I would say. Really good. Okay, next is Cut Down. Cut Down has actually gained popularity recently, in my opinion, with the increase in soldier decks that we're seeing out in the meta. So Cut Down is just extremely valuable into so many early game cards. It's a really cheap removal, only 1 black, and you can destroy any target creature whose toughness plus power is 5 or less. So anything that's 3/2 or 2/3 or less, you can just get rid of it with Cut Down. 1 black mana, so very high value card, and there are a lot of cards out there that this can hit. Okay, Go for the Throat. We have seen a lot of Infernal Grasps out there as well. I think Go for the Throat has kind of been replaced with it just because there aren't as many artifacts being run as you would expect, I guess. So you do get a lot of value out of the Go for the Throat, destroy target non-artifact creature, whereas Infernal Grasp could destroy any creature, but you lost 2 life. That gets a little iffy near the end of the game when you're like sitting at like 4 life, like you don't really want to give 2 life for a removal, so having Go for Throat instead is definitely favorable. So main removal in this deck for sure. All right, Reckoner Bankbuster. This is in all the mono black decks, I'm pretty sure, for multiple reasons, honestly. It works with aggro because you can crew it for 3 and it becomes a 4/4, and there are a lot of cards that have power of 3. Tenacious Underdog, the Graveyard Trespasser, the Phyrexian Fleshgorger. We'll get into all of these. We look at the aggro and control section of this deck, but he can be crewed by a lot of cards that are running mono black, and even better than that, he has draw. You can pay 2 mana and tap him up to 3 times, on 3 separate turns, to get a draw. So draw and aggressive 4/4 character or creature, sorry, very high value card. Okay, and then the last one of our staples is, of course, Shield Dread, the Apocalypse. If you're running black in your deck, you need to run 3 or more shield dreads. Actually, occasionally I've seen people run 2 and it totally works as well. But this card is extremely potent. She's so much value. She's a 4-cost 4/5 with Death Touch, which is fantastic right there. Very hard to attack into something like that. But better than all of that is whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, and whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. This is a get it off the board immediately if your opponent puts this down, because this is a ticking time bomb. You can't look for cards without losing so much life. You don't want them to gain life because you're further and further away from defeating them. So you need to remove this card, and since it's that good, we're definitely going to run it. Okay, let's look at the aggro. So first up in aggro is the Vault Sleeper. This card is not run all of the time, but I think it is really good. I think it makes a lot of sense in the aggro deck. So it is a 1/1 for 1, but you can kind of level it up. So the first time you level up, you pay 1, it becomes a 2/2. The next time you level it up, you pay 2 mana, and it becomes a 3/3 with Death Touch, which is really nice as just a blocker, or even as an attacker to squeak through if they don't want to block something with Death Touch because they just lose it. And then after that, you can continually pay 3 mana to put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. You also lose a life, but if you're rocking Shieldred, you're getting 2 life off that draw, so losing the 1 is not a big deal. And it is very nice because this thing maintains Death Touch as you continually add counters on it, so you can end up having like a huge 5/5 Death Touch creature that is giving you draw. So I really like this card because early it does come in. If you don't have mana to spend in those early turns, you can always put that mana into leveling the Evolved Sleeper up, and then the Death Touch comes in handy all the time. All right, next up is Misery Shadow. This is a new Brothers War card. This card is really aggressive. It works really well in aggro decks. So it's a 2-cost for 2. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead. That is fantastic to run just because there are so many graveyard tricks out there. So cards don't no longer go to the graveyard, right? They go to exile. Only your opponents though. So that's really nice. But what makes this so good is that for 1 colorless mana, so you can run this in any multicolored deck that's running black, you can give it +1/+1 till end of turn. So imagine a world where you play this on turn 2. On turn 3, you don't have a good play, but you attack with this. You could potentially buff it up to a 5/5 on turn 3. That is really strong early aggressive card. If they do not have anything down, if they don't have blockers, if they don't have removal, that could punch really hard really early on. Also, this card is extremely hard to hit with Cut Down. We were talking about this card earlier. If you ever target this and they have mana up, they just have to pay 1 mana to make it a 3/3, and the Cut Down will fizzle out since it is no longer a valid target. So also not necessarily the easiest to remove for anything that does targeted amount of damage because you can buff it up. Okay, next up, Tenacious Underdog. I actually was surprised to see that this guy's still kicking. He has been run in black since the day he came out, it feels like. So this is a 3/2 for 3, which is really good. He is also one of our main candidates for the Bankbuster to crew for 3. He is a 3/2, so that works really well there. But if you ever do lose him, or if you just want to play him for the Blitz cost, you pay 2 life, and you can attack with him, of course. When he dies, though, you draw a card. So this is another way to draw a card. You are paying 2 life. Remember, though, with Shieldred out there, sometimes it doesn't matter at all. You're happy to pay it just for the draw to finish out the game. So yeah, he's good because he's early drop. He is a 3/2, so if you do get damage through, that's quite a bit. He can crew our Bankbuster, and he has draw. So not too much to hate there. All right, next, Graveyard Trespasser. So I know I said this about the Tenacious Underdog, but I am actually really surprised the Graveyard Trespasser is still in decks because I thought there were some better 3-drops that had come out with the latest set that would totally overtake this card, but that is not the case because she shuts down graveyard interactions. So she is a 3/3 for 3. She does have a ward where you discard a card, which feels so nice because if they ever do target this creature for removal, they have to discard a card. Unless they're sitting on a bunch of extra land, it just feels really good to see them have to discard, especially early on if you have this out early. But what makes her so good and why she's still played all the time is because whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, you gain a life and lose a life. But regardless if it's a creature or not, pulling stuff out of people's graveyards that they are trying to reanimate or flash back or unearth, or all of the many graveyard interactions that exist, shutting them down with this is really nice. Especially if you hit on turn 2 with the removal and then drop her on turn 3 and you get to remove their card from the graveyard and gain life, lose life, and attack the next turn. Like, she's getting so much value out on the turn she comes in, that she's just that good. Okay, and next is what I thought would be the card that totally shut the Graveyard Trespasser down, the Phyrexian Fleshgorger. So this is a prototype card. It can be cast for 7 and it comes in as a 7/5, or you can cast it for 2 black and a colorless, so for 3 mana. It comes in as a 3/3. No matter how you cast it though, it does have Menace and Lifelink and Ward. Pay life equal to its power. So I thought this was a much better 3-drop, especially with the fact that it has Menace and Lifelink. Menace is extremely hard to block against. Lifelink is so good in aggro decks because it puts you, or in any deck really, honestly, because it gives you more of an advantage. They have more life they have to push through. They also don't want to leave this up too long or you will gain too much life. And if they ever do target it, they have to lose even more life on top of that. So it doesn't shut down the graveyards the way that the Graveyard Trespasser does, but this is a very potent, annoying card to deal with. And remember, it's an artifact, so Go for the Throat does not hit it, and neither would Cut Down. So they need to have a specific removal or clear your board and have you sacrifice. There are white removal out there, and of course it could be countered with blue counters, but if this does get down, it is quite annoying to deal with. Okay, and another new card that I thought was also going to kick the Trespasser out was Gix. So he is a 3/3 for 3. When a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller, which is you, may pay 1 life. If they do, you draw a card. So this is another draw. It's similar to the Evolved Sleeper where you pay 1 life for the draw. Remember, with the Shieldred, paying a life for a draw is necessarily nothing. So this is run in aggro decks, and it is just basically early draw. If you have all these little creatures swinging all the time, if you get any of them through, you're able to draw and just keep up the aggression, and that's what makes this so good in this deck. But it does work even maybe in the control or in more mid-range versions of this deck because of the second ability, which is pretty good in my opinion. So for 7 mana, which is quite a bit, but 7 mana is also what the Phyrexian Fleshgorger costs if you want to cast it at the not prototype cost. So there are times where you definitely hit 7 mana. So for 7 mana, you can discard X cards, exile the top X cards of your target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among those cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Without paying the mana cost. So you pay 7 mana and you just play cards off the top of their deck. And you don't pay more mana for more cards. Like if you're sitting on 3 land in your hand, you just discard all 3 of those and you get to pay the top 3 cards of the deck. So I have definitely seen this have some great success through playing planeswalkers and board wipes off of opponents' top of their deck. So that is a very cool interaction. On top of the fact that this gives you a ton of draw. Okay, next we're going to look at the control. So what are people running in control? So the Kiva Reckoner Raid. This card is such a good card, honestly. I did see it fall out of the meta. I wasn't sure if it was going to come back just because the aggro version of Mono Black seemed to take a little bit of a lead. But people are playing the mid-range control version again, and this is definitely back. So this is a 1-drop, and it's a saga. It does turn into a 2/2 creature with Menace, and it gives all vehicles Menace, so that would give your Bankbuster Menace if you did have this creature in the non-saga form. But for the first 2 levels of the saga, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So you draw this on turn 1, and by turn 3 you have a 4 life advantage because they have lost 2 life and you have gained 2 life. So it's just really early on, having like that much of an advantage feels really good, especially if you are going to go for the mid-range, like you want that little extra comfort. And then it turns into the 2/2 Menace. So also not bad. Okay. Next, Concealing Curtains. So this isn't always played, but I do think it is good. So this is a 1-drop, 0/4. You can transform it And when you transform it, you can look at target opponent's hand and have them discard one of their cards. They do get to draw a card after they discard, so you don't always want to pick something for them to discard. You just basically use it for the information, see what they have. You can kind of plan your turns out better. That works really well, of course, with the mid-range decks. They like to have as much information as possible so they know where to put their spells. So really useful for that. And if you don't have anything else to play on turn 3, you also can get a creature with menace out of it, as well as all the information. So very good card there. All right, next, Pilfer. This is another card I see people running. A target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it and have them discard that card. So this is, again, really good just to pull out those key cards, slow people down, so you can kind of get your footing as a mid-range deck. Also, very annoying to have to discard your good cards. I do not like getting pilfered. Okay, next, Sorin, the Mirthless. So he is fantastic into other control decks, and I think that's why he's run here. Mid-range often finds himself struggling against other mid-range, and this card seems to do really well into those decks. So it is a 4-drop 4 loyalty counter planeswalker. For +1, you can look at the top card of your library, you can reveal it, and then pay its mana cost in life to have it go into your hand. So this is draw. Of course, again, you do have to pay life for it, but everybody runs Shieldred, so maybe it's not so bad. Also, it gives you a 2/3 vampire creature with flying and lifelink, and I think that is what makes it so good. There are flyers out there in other mid-range decks that do become problems, but having a blocker that will also give you lifelink, or using this to attack over defenders into enemy planeswalkers, things like that are what make this so good. The draw and having the lifelink, 2/3, it's not as easily attacked into. It does have a little bit of a buffer there in its defenses, so very good card. And then if you ever do get it to ultimate, -7, deals 13 damage to any target and you gain 13 life. You can pretty much win the game with that if you ever can ultimate it. So a very good card. Okay, next, Junji. So the Midnight Sky. I find this card absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful art on this card. This guy is a 5/5 4/5 flying menace. When he dies, so first of all, he's flying and menace, which is just really good. They have to have 2 flyers to be able to block this, and it's 5 power, so that's a lot of damage coming through. And if you can get this into enemy planeswalkers or just right into their face, you're gonna get a lot of value out of that. And when he dies, you can do one of the following: each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life. That could be really good into another mid-range or control deck. Having them discard could really benefit you. Or you could put a non-target creature card from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. A non-creature card from a graveyard. So you can pull it out of an enemy graveyard as well. You do lose 2 life, but if you pull something like a Shieldred out or an enemy creature, that can be potent. Actually, this would work extremely well with the Fleshgorger, because pulling this out of the graveyard, it would come in as a 7/5. So there are lots of little tricks with this when it dies. So if you do go up against this, you want to exile it. If you exile this creature, it will not trigger that, and they don't get to make that choice. They won't get to pull anything out of the graveyard, have you discard. So that is the counter to it, but otherwise there's just a lot of value out of that card. And playing in a mid-range control deck, you do have time to work up into the 5-drop, and then have this potent issue for them to deal with. All right, and last card that I see in the control decks all the time is the Soul Transfer. This card is a 3 cost, and you can choose either of these options, but if you control an artifact and an enchantment, you can cast both. So the Okiba Raid Reckoner is an enchantment, and the Bank Buster is the artifact. That is the combo that usually allows this to be able to use both. So the options are to exile target creature or planeswalker and return target creature or planeswalker from the graveyard to your hand. So in the event that you can do both, that is a fantastic removal that gets rid of basically everything. Creature or planeswalker, everything's super potent. And returning something like a Shieldred or a Junji or a Liliana or even a Sorin back to your hand can be extremely beneficial. Okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses? So the strengths are definitely removal and draw. We saw a ton of draw here. Even in the staples, I'll give us removal and draw. And then the weakness are they have very few win cons and no board wipe. So Mono Black lost their board wipe. It was banned some months ago. The Meat Hook was the go-to board wipe, but that got banned. So there is no solid board wipe. There are Path of Perils and other cards that you can use, but they just aren't as effective, so people aren't really running them. You do have to use a lot of spot removal and aggression to kind of push through. So that is definitely the con. You can get overwhelmed by a lot of aggro decks that have a lot of creatures, something like soldiers. It's definitely possible to get overwhelmed if you don't stay on top of your removal or have your own threats to try to push through. Besides that, these decks are really strong. They play really consistently. You always seem to find ways to get draw when you need it. You always top deck the removal when you need it because there's so much in here. And there's almost, of these staples, maybe aside from a cut down, you never feel bad about drawing any of these. Like drawing a Shield Dread, drawing an Evoke Despair, Liliana Veil, even late game, early game, no matter when, you love to see these and have these on hand. So this deck definitely feels really strong. All right, let's just jump into the next one. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but I am going to do soldiers. So I broke this into staples and then mono white and Azurius soldiers. So I was actually going to look at the soldiers like separately, mono white and Azurius, but when I was going through these, I realized they are actually extremely similar. There's only like less than a handful of cards that separate these two decks from each other, aside from, of course, the land distribution that you have to do. All right, so let's hit the staples. So first off, we have Recruitment Officer. So this is a 2/1 for 1. She is a human soldier. What makes her so good is for 4 mana, you can look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature card with mana 3 or less from among them and put it into your hand. And you put the rest at the bottom of your library. So this deck is packed with soldiers, and I don't think there's maybe one card I can think of that is not mana 3 or less. So you can basically hit so many things with this card, and it doesn't tap or anything. You can do this whenever convenient. So very nice there for a little bit of draw. All right, Valiant Veteran. This card is really good. It really feels good when you get this going. So he's a 2/2 for 2. Other soldiers you control get +1/+1. So this is just a straight buff. The more soldier you have, the more benefit this gives you. So fantastic. And he is not legendary, so you could have 4 of them on the board, giving everybody +4/+4, which is really annoying if that ever does happen. Also, when he dies, you can exile him from your graveyard and put a 1/1 counter on each soldier you control. So you can do that at instant speed as well. So attack with everything and then just slam down that +1/+1 counter. Can be pretty good, especially if the opponent's not thinking that you can do that. All right, next, Thalia. Thalia is so great. She's the best 2-drop in this deck. I absolutely love getting her out as soon as possible. So she's a 2/1 for 2. She does have First Strike. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. It does apply to you as well, and there are a couple removal cards people splash into this deck that will end up costing 1 more. Everything is so cheap though, so it doesn't really matter. What it does is it usually screws over your opponent so much, especially if you think back to the mono black decks we were looking at. They run a ton of planeswalkers, instants, and sorceries, sagas, enchantments. All of those cost 1 more. The only thing that doesn't get that extra cost are creatures. So this basically hurts everybody who's not a full creature deck, and you are a full creature deck, so you're good with it. She is legendary though, so you can only have 1 on the battlefield at a time, which is good, because if you could stack that, that would be insane. Okay, this is the main removal in the deck, Brutal Cathar. So he is a 3-cost 2/2. When he enters the battlefield or transforms back into Brutal Cathar, because he can turn it into a 3/3 First Strike with Ward when it's nighttime, but if it ever comes back to daytime, he gets to do this again. Exile target creature and opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield. So the downside to this is even if you get a whole bunch of creatures exiled with the Brutal Cathar, 1 removal on the Brutal Cathar will put them all back. Also, board wipes, that board wipe him will not include what he has exiled, so all those exiled cards will come back into play. So stuff like that kind of sucks. But since it's such an aggressive deck, just being able to use this as a creature and a removal all in one feels really good. He is also a soldier in both forms, so he will benefit from Valiant Veteran and the like. So very good. Okay, next Siege Veteran. So he is also a 3-cost 2/2 human soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on a target creature you control. Whenever another non-token soldier, sorry, you control dies, create a 1/1. So even if something gets removed, you do get a 1/1 from it, which keeps your soldier count the same, which is really nice with this card. So anything getting benefits from to all soldiers, like the Valorant Veteran, losing a soldier, you just get another one back and you can buff it. Also, this thing puts the counters out every single turn. If you have multiple down, it's not legendary, so you can't have multiple down. You're putting counters all over the place. This can definitely get out of control. If you get this down early too, you get a lot of value out of it. Start putting counters on every creature you're putting down, spreading out all your damage across the board. They don't have a really strong removal target because they can remove the 2/2, but now there's all these 5/5s around. Stuff like that makes this card really annoying if it gets going. Okay, and the last staple is Muriel, and this was the card I was thinking of that was actually a 4-cost. Everything else is 3 or less, so this is the only card that the recruitment officer couldn't hit with her draw, but it's okay, you don't run too many of them, you can draw into it no problem. Legendary creature. So she's a human soldier. She is a 4-cost 3/4. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. It is so annoying. People who want to use the Fable Mirror or, sorry, Kiki Jiki to tap into a defender, they can't do that on your turn. They have to do it only as part of their main phase. So it does stop some decks' ability to do some tricks, which is really nice. But better than all of that, whenever she attacks, you create X11 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens where X is the number of soldiers you control, and you get a ton of soldiers going with this deck. So I have definitely seen her tap and put 6, 7, 8 1/1s down with just one attack, which is now, that's crazy. That's so many creatures. And if they're all getting buffed, those could be 2/2s or 3/3s coming out. So she can create you quite the army. She does not come out till turn 4, and sometimes you have the opponent like pretty much dead by then, but if not, she is a good finisher. Okay, so those are all white cards. Those are our staples. Let's take a look at the rest of the mono white. So this is another removal that we see people running, Lay Down Arms. It is a 1 mana cost. And it's kind of important to keep all the removal really cheap because Thalia, you don't want Thalia to hurt yourself. So with Thalia out, this is only a 2 cost. It's still not that bad. Exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. So this is why this is only in the mono white and not in the Azurius. It might still be effective in the Azurius deck, Azurius being the blue-white, but obviously you're going to get a lot more value out of it in the mono white. So there is a downside to it though. Its controller gains 3 life. So you do get to exile something for cheap, but you are giving them 3 life, which means you have to push through 3 more life. Being an aggro deck, it's usually not a problem, especially if you're removing a potential blocker, and getting that extra 3 damage through because of that could very well be worth. Okay, next. Guardian of New Benalia. So this is a 2/2 for 2. She has Enlist. Whenever this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature you control that does not have Summoning Sickness. When you do, you can add its power to Benalia until end of turn. So whenever you do enlist her, she gets to scry, which is really nice. Kind of move your cards around off the top of your deck. Make sure you're not having any bad draws. And this is what makes her so good in this deck is her discard. So you can discard a card and she gains indestructible until end of turn, and she does get tapped. But if you are blocking or attacking with her, having that discard to make her indestructible is really nice. Okay, that was all I had for mono white. So let's go to the Azurius. So one of the main cards in the Azurius Soldiers deck, and what makes the blue-white soldier deck so good, is Harbin, the Vanguard Aviator. So he is 1 white, 1 blue, a human soldier. He is a legendary, 3/2 with flyer. Whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying. And you can just imagine a world where you have a bunch of Muriel soldiers out and a Valiant veterans. They're all 2/2s, and then you attack with them all, and now they're 3/3 flyers. There are definitely worlds where you just slam down a Harbin, attack with your board, and win right then and there. Just because if you have 5 or more soldiers out, they all get flying and +1/+1. Okay, and then the only other card that people are slamming into the blue-white version of this deck is the Sky Strike Officer. He is a 3-cost 2/3 with flying, so another flyer, which is really nice. Whenever she attacks, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So this is another means of getting some more soldiers out. And this is really fantastic. I absolutely love this. Tap 3 untapped soldiers to draw a card. With how many soldiers are out there in this deck, it is not too bad. You can attack with a bunch, and you're even going to create some, and they'll just be chilling, hold 3 back, and you have all the draw if you don't need them for blocks, or you can even tap it when you do block. So this is a very easy to use this for the draw, and the flying and everything is really good. Okay, what are the strengths of this deck? I have to plug my headset in here. Okay, well, the strengths are definitely overwhelming aggression. Everything is so low cost, and it all has the ability to buff each other up or create more soldiers. Basically, everything does some version of that, minus the little bit of removal that's in there. So there is quite a bit of early aggression coming out of this deck. Weaknesses are, of course, board wipes. If you get all these massive creatures down, amount of soldiers down, and they all get wiped, you have absolutely nothing because you've played your whole hand and now you're top decking. Feels pretty bad. All right, so that was soldiers. All right, next we're gonna run through mono blue tempo. This deck is still performing. We all hate blue, except for the players that actually like blue. I don't like blue because it's the unfun version of Magic, but it is still doing very well, and I actually find this version of mono blue actually quite enjoyable to play, and when comparing it to other blue decks I've been there. Okay, I broke this one down by creatures. We have draw and protection is kind of what I've called it, and then the control aspect of this deck, of course. All right, so first up, creatures. We have the Delver of Secrets. So this is a 1-cost 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your library. If you reveal that card, you may reveal it, and if it's an instant or sorcery, you can transform Delver into a 3/2 flyer, which is really nice, especially if you get that out on turn 2 or 3. Now you have 3 damage coming in the air that they have to deal with. Next creature is the Ledger Shredder. This is a 2-cost 1/3. He has flying. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, so that's you or the opponent, any player, this guy connives. And connive gives you the ability to draw a card and discard a card. If the card you discard is not a land, you get to put a 1/1 counter on this guy. So you are able to kind of cycle through bad cards in your hand with this connive mechanic, and also buff him up in the process. So that is pretty good. You do have to play your second spell each turn. Well, there are so many like low cost instants and sorceries in this deck, so it's probably not hard for you to do it, but opponents as well, especially in aggro decks. Even looking at that soldier deck, they will commonly be playing 2 or 3 cards on their turn, so you definitely hit that more than you would think. All right, and then this guy is the game-winning creature in my opinion. He is a 3-cost. His power is equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard, and then his toughness is always 4. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so it makes all of your counters and draw cards all cheaper, which is very annoying when they have so many of them in this deck. This guy gets huge too, by the way. So if you're constantly casting all of the spells, like you're doing counters after counters, you're bouncing your opponent's cards, you're buffing your creatures, all the things you can do in this deck, I've seen this guy get up to like 10-4, 11-4, 12-4 even. So definitely 2 swings of this guy and you won. Not uncommon. Okay, and the last creature we see in this deck is the Tolarian Terror. He is a 7-cost 5/5, but this spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard, so that's another creature that benefits from a bunch of sorceries and instants being in your graveyard. He also has Ward 2, so he's a little annoying to remove, especially if you have this guy out early. You pay like 4 or 5 instants of sorceries, and you can have this guy out on turn 3 or 4 for 1 or 2 mana, which is kind of annoying to have a 5/5 out that early. Definitely seen it though. Very annoying to attack into. Also a really good counter into aggro decks because they can't really get past 5/5. Okay, so let's look at the draw and protection in this deck. So consider, is 1-drop. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard and draw a card. So it basically lets you like figure out if you want what you off the top, and if not, you throw it in the graveyard. This also does allow you to put an instant or sorcery in the graveyard if you want to increase Haughty Djinn and or get the Tolarian Terror out for cheaper. Next we have Shore Up. So target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. There is another card. Do I actually have it in here? No, there's another 1-drop that allows you to phase the creature out. Basically works the same way. You can use it so they're phased out and they can't be targeted or sacrificed or anything. This one gives hexproof, but also allows you to untap, so you can attack with something and then you can also use this to untap and block. So I think this is used a little bit more, has a little bit more utility, but both are really good at protecting your Haughty Djinns or Ledger Shredders, that those flyers that are really causing your opponent some problems. Keep them there. Okay, next, Impulse. This is a 2-drop. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest of the bottom of your library. So this is just like a draw, looking for something very specific if you need. Thirst for Discovery is another draw. Draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards unless you discard a basic land. So drawing 3 cards, you can just throw a land away and you get to keep those 3 cards or 2 depending if you drew the land. So very good draw too for only 3. Okay, and then the annoying part of this deck, here we go. Fading Hope. So this is all the control cards that they are using to hold tempo and keep you behind. So that is what this column is, the keep you behind column. So Fading Hope is a 1-drop. Return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value is 3 or less, you get to scry. That secondary is just a nice little bonus, but just bouncing, you play something and they just bounce it back to your hand. It's so annoying. It's like your turn was wasted, and they did it for 1 mana, of course. Rona's Vortex, same idea. Return to a creature or planeswalker you don't control to their owner's hand. If the spell was kicked, put that permanent in the bottom of the owner's library instead. So this does hit creature or planeswalker, which is really nice. Being able to bounce a planeswalker can be very, very beneficial, especially if you're getting close to ultimating it. I don't know if I've actually seen anybody splash a little bit of black. It wouldn't be a bad idea, though, to splash 1 black in there for the kicker. It would make this a total cost of 4. I'm not sure how nice that is, but this being able to hit planeswalkers is definitely worth for 1 mana. All right, Spell Pierce. Oh man, there are some cards out there when you Spell Pierce, it feels so good. So this is a 1-drop as well. Counter target non-creature spell unless the controller plays 3. So them playing a planeswalker, like usually, or sorry, plays 2. So you can hit this on planeswalkers, or Invoke Despairs is a really nice one if you can ever Spell Pierce and Invoke Despair. Is generally speaking those hard-hitting non-creature spells that they're playing in the middle of the game, they don't have the extra 2 mana, so you can hit some really good value on this card. Okay, Make Disappear. This is also gonna have some really good value on this for 2 mana. Remember that this can actually go down to 1 if you have a Haughty Djinn out, right? Because he does give you a discount. So casually 1, that just means that you can sacrifice a creature of your own. So like maybe a Delver Secrets that you don't really need anymore. And then have this actually be doubled, right? But anyways, counter target spell unless his controller pays 2. So if you were to do the casualty, it would actually be the controller pays 4 because they have to pay 2 twice is how it works. But yeah, if they're tapped out, you can get them get a counter out for super cheap. Okay, Negate. This is another counter non-target creature spell. Basically, because you have so much aggression with these creatures, like they are flyers or they're big beefy boys, you're not too worried about countering creatures as much. You can definitely hit some good creatures with Make Disappear and other counters, but the negates and spell pierces are really going to save you because it's the removal, it's the planeswalkers, the board wipes, it's the draw that the opponent is going to hit that is actually going to threaten you. So it is really high value to have negates and spell pierces against the decks that could actually get you. Oh, and then this is the generic counter target spell. So this is kind of a unique card, came out with Brothers War. You can choose one. You can either counter target spell or tap up to 2 target creatures. So they do have creatures that are potentially going to hit you for lethal if you don't have the Fading Hope or the Rona's Vortex to kind of bounce them out of the game, or you don't necessarily want to do it because they have an enter mechanic that could cause you more problems, you can tap them and hopefully get the win after that. So nice utility on that card, and honestly just countering target spell could definitely win you a game. Okay, so the strengths and weaknesses. So the strengths are it is extremely reactive and there's a ton of draw. So you basically can sit on your counters until they actually play something you're worried about, else you just cast your draw cards and keep building up your library so you can hit some of your good creatures, or have all the counters you would need to stop the opponent. Weakness is this basically has no way to recover. If they lose their Haughty Djinn, or if too much got through, you didn't have the counters on time, or they did have enough mana that you didn't get value out of Make Disappear or Spell Pierce, stuff like that, and they do have too much of a board state, there is no board wipe, there is no coming back. If a Toltarian Terror and a Haughty Djinn aren't going to get the done for you, you're done. There are no Planeswalkers here that give you extra draw and removal. There's nothing else in this deck except for the cards we see here. So definitely has to hold tempo right from the beginning of the game in order to win. Otherwise, it's pretty tough. Okay, so that was Mono Blue. We are moving on to Red Deck wins, which I'm so happy that we're actually seeing Red Deck wins in the last couple times I've gone over decks, because there was a time, basically in the last half of 2022 until more recently, basically, that aggro decks were not seen. Everybody was playing control or mid-range or some version thereof. Just no world for aggro. All the board wipes. This is before they started banning the board wipes. Okay, so for Red Deck wins, we're gonna break that into creatures, burn spells, and then other. They'll make more sense when they came in. I couldn't think of a good word for them. All right, let's fly through the creatures. So first one up, Monastery Swiftspear. This is a card that came out with Brothers War, so it's a little bit newer. It is a 1/2 for 1 with haste and prowess. So prowess just means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, which is really nice. Next we have the Phoenix Chick. So this is a 1/1 for 1. She has flying and haste. She cannot block. But if you have 3 or more attackers, you can pull her from the graveyard back onto the battlefield and give her a 1/1 counter, which is kind of nice. And she is a flyer. Next we have the Voldaren Epicure. I first saw this card and I was like, why are people running this 1-drop over any of the other good 1-drops? But it makes sense now that I've seen it played. So when she enters the battlefield, you do 1 damage to each opponent and you create a blood token. And the blood token allows you to discard a card, you sacrifice that token, and you can draw a card. So later in the game, it gives you an opportunity to kind of cycle through some cards and get those spells you need to finish it off. There are other, I guess before I go on, all 3 of these cards are heavily buffed by some of the other cards we're going to see, which makes them a lot better. We'll get into that though. Okay, next, Feldon Ronom Excavator? He's a 2/2 for 2. He's a legendary creature. He is a human. He has haste. He can't block. Whenever he's dealt damage, you can exile that many cards from the top of your library. You choose one of them until end of your next turn. You may play that card. So the thing that's interesting about this is whenever he's dealt damage, that many cards you exile. So if you attack him, he can't block, right? So if you attack with him and they block with like a 5/5, he takes 5 damage and you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library. So you kind of have to be careful when you're blocking. You basically want to block this with exactly 2 damage or just straight up remove it with the removal so that they don't get that opportunity to play an extra card. Okay, next is Ski. Ski is kind of not in every deck, but he's definitely worth mentioning because he's had a ton of time in the decks. So he's the Dubious Monarch. He's a 3-cost 2/2 with haste. Whenever he attacks, you create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. And then you can also bring him back from the graveyard by exiling 4 other cards in your graveyard and paying 4 mana. And getting a bunch of cards in your graveyard isn't actually that difficult because there are a bunch of instances of sorceries that you're just going to fly through. So bringing him back from the graveyard is definitely not out of the picture. Okay, so for the burn spells, we have End the Festivities. This on its own again doesn't look that great, but we'll see why it's so good. So it is a 1-drop. It's a sorcery. End the festivities deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So 1 damage isn't that significant. It does end up working really well against things like soldier decks that are pulling in a ton of 1/1s, or hitting something like Liliana, who often gets down to 1. Wandering Emperor often gets down to 1 loyalty counter, so it can hit those planeswalkers. But again, there's a card we will see that makes it a lot better. Okay, the next burn is Play with Fire. So this is another 1 cost. Deals 2 damage to any target. If a player is dealt damage this way, you can scry. So that's kind of nice, little extra bonus if you just want to do it straight to their face. And the last burn spell is Lightning Strike, a classic. This card has been reprinted infinite number of times. Obviously not infinite, but so many times. This is always in every single burn deck ever, forever. And it just does 3 damage to any target for 2 mana. Okay, so let's get into the good stuff, the other column. All right, first up, Reckless Impulse. So this is a sorcery, it's a 2 cost. It allows you to exile 2 cards from the top of your library, and then until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So this is kind of like the draw mechanic of the game. It also does buff up the Monastery Swiftspear, because it is a non-creature spell. So casting this, and then maybe casting like a Play with Fire off of it, or if you hit anything else, that'll just buff up your Swiftspear. So it works really well with that. All right, next is Kumano, Faces of Kakazan. So this guy is a saga. He's 1 cost, which is really nice. When he comes on, he does 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker. So again, that 1 damage can hit a couple key planeswalkers. When on the second saga, when you cast your next creature spell, that creature enters with a 1/1 counter on it. So that works really well with our flyers. Or even Felden, because now he has to take at least 3 damage, which gives you more opportunity to look for cards. And then when Kumano hits its 3rd saga, it transforms into a 2/2 creature that has a subtext that says, if a creature opponent you control would die, exile instead. So this card does hit or get rid of some of those graveyard interactions, because things are going into exile when you have that out. So that is always nice, on top of all the other things it does for us. And it is a 2/2 with haste, so on the turn that it flips, it does get to attack, which is kind of nice as well. Keep the aggro going. Okay, this is the card I was hinting at when I was like, oh, these cards are okay, but they get better. This is how they get better. So Mechanized Warfare. This is a 3-cost enchantment. If a red or artifact source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much +1. So that means and the festivities, does 2 damage to everything and to players and to planeswalkers. Like, it goes to 2 damage. Lightning Strike now hits for 4 damage. Play with Fire now hits for 3 damage. And so on and so on. So things like the Voldaren Epicure, where when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, that becomes 2 damage. And now she herself does 2 damage when she attacks. So this Mechanized Warfare, and you can have multiple of them out, really beef up this deck. So this does come out on turn 3, 4 maybe, depending on how you hit your lands. This deck runs like 22 land, maybe 23 maximum. So you may not always hit all your lands on time, but still, when you get this out, basically everything you play after the fact is pumped up. So it definitely fast tracks the win here once you get this going. Okay, and the last card I want to look up here in our other column is Chandra, Dress to Kill. So she's another 3-cost. This deck is extremely low cost deck. These cards being the only things that are 3, and Ski, who actually isn't being run as much. So basically just the Mechanized Warfare and Chandra. So she's a legendary planeswalker. For +1, you can add a red mana and do 1 damage to up to 1 target player or planeswalker. Again, with Mechanized Warfare, that would become 2. For +1, you can exile top card of your library. If it's red, you may cast it this turn. So she works very well in a mono red deck. It also gives you a little bit of draw if you need that. And this is extremely rare to hit just because this deck is so fast. You probably very, very rarely will ever hit the -7. But if you do, you can exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast red spells from among them this turn. You get an emblem with, whenever you cast a red spell, this emblem deals X damage to any target, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. So that's kind of crazy because if you have the Mechanized Warfare out, that would again be X+1, any red source. So all of this just is so much better when you have that Mechanized Warfare in there. Okay, so what are the strengths weaknesses? Well, the strengths are it's fast and overwhelming, like really fast. Red Deck Wins has historically been the fastest aggro deck ever built, ever played. Weaknesses is it runs out of steam. If you don't get the damage through by turn 5, you don't have them like sitting on 2 to 4 life by that time, you're really struggling. Removal shuts it down. So a lot of the damage that this deck is putting out does come from creatures and creature sources. So board wipes, targeted removals, all of that things really slow this deck down, and you can't quite pull the win with just some lightning strikes, play with fires, things like that. You do need to get these creatures through. So removing them is definitely going to help. And of course, it's not here, but lifelink. Lifelink always shuts down burn decks, aggro decks basically. So any little bit of life gain, even like gaining 4 life in the first 5 turns, is sometimes enough to burn this deck out, and it will not have the damage output. Okay, that is mono red. I have one more top deck that I'm going to go through, and then I have some honorable mentions. So this is our last best deck of 2022, and that is Grixis Midrange. I kind of hummed and hawed, and I was like, well, Esper Midrange was good for so long, but it's just not competing with the Grixis right now. Grixis does seem to be the king of the mid-range decks. So let's take a look at it. I broke this one down into utility, control, and win cons. So let's take a look at the utility. This deck does have a ton of utility. It's like the utility master, and I think that's why it's so strong. So Saheeli, this is a new Planeswalker that came out with Brothers War. I saw this and I thought for sure there was going to be a powerful Izzet deck out there that would utilize this card. But no, of course not. Just shove it in our already very powerful Grixis deck to make it even better. So Saheeli, she comes in with 3 loyalty counters for 4 mana. You can +1 to scry 1, and you may tap an untapped artifact you control if you do draw a card. Her -2 is to create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. They gain haste. So this does give you 2 1/1s with haste that you can attack with, which is kind of aggressive. But most likely these are going to be used to draw a card, because you can scry 1 and then tap an untapped artifact, so that means you couldn't have attacked with these yet, to draw a card. So that little combo that she has there, where she can create these little flyers, which you may need as blockers potentially in the air, and then allow you to tap them for draw, is what makes her so strong. She is going to help you draw really efficiently pretty early on too. Also her -4, which is not that hard to hit, of course. You get an emblem with artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So in this Grixis mid-range, there are not a ton of artifacts, if any. I think maybe the Bankbuster might be the only one. So the goal of this card in this deck is definitely for that scry and draw, which is very powerful in a mid-range deck because there are so many options to draw into. So she could be very good. Okay, next is the Blood Tithe Harvester. So this guy is in Grixis since the beginning of time. He is really, really good. He has a 2-cost 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you create a blood token, which is an artifact token that says pay 1 and tap the token, discard a card, sacrifice this artifact, and draw a card. So basically just allows you to cycle through cards in your hand that you may not need. Also, he has an ability where you can tap him and you can sacrifice him. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of blood tokens. So if he only comes in with 1 token, maybe you have to have 2, 3 of them to get anywhere. But there are other cards in this deck that make him so good. We will see them soon. Before we get to it though, let's look at Corpse Appraiser, because this is another card that has been in Grixis for a long time. He has a 3-cost 3/3. When Corpse Appraiser enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature card from a graveyard. If a card is put into exile this way, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So this is like a huge draw mechanic, but it also removes cards from an enemy graveyard, and there are lots of graveyard tricks out there. So lots of value on this card. Okay, and then this next card is the card that makes the last 2 cards extremely good. So Fable of the Mirror Breaker. So she has a 3 cost. We've definitely talked about her before. She shows up in every red deck, except for red deck wins, I guess. So you get a 2/2 red goblin that has, whenever you attack with it, you can create a treasure token, which allows you to tap for mana. You may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, you draw that many cards, so it has a little cycle mechanic there. And then when it hits the 3rd saga, it turns into a 2/2 Kiki Jiki that has the ability to copy a target non-legendary creature. It gains haste, and it is sacrificed at end of turn. So, with the Blood Tithe Harvester, creating a copy of it would bring in another blood token, and you are going to lose that copy no matter what. So, tapping it and sacrificing it to do a -X is extremely valuable. You could either attack with the 3/2 token or just use it to start removing things. -X also does not get protected by indestructible. We did see some white cards that had indestructible. If you -X them, there is no such thing as indestructible. The card is gone. So that is a good candidate for a copy. And the Corpse Praiser as well. Whenever it enters, you can exile another target creature and potentially get another draw off of it. So these 2 cards, the Blood Tithe Harvester and the Corpse Appraiser, work extremely well with Kiki Jiki. But again, this is a mid-range deck because getting all of that going takes about 4 turns. So do keep that in mind. You do have a lot of time to shut this down. The Fable Mirror Breaker, don't let it get going. Okay, next is the Reckoner Bankbuster. So this is the only artifact I believe is run in this deck that Saheeli would give you a discount on, but the Bankbuster is so good on its own, and it doesn't even need a discount for only 2 mana. I talked about it before, but this is a 4/4 creature. It only needs to be crewed by 3. Both the Blood Tithe Harvester and the Corpse Appraiser have 3 power, so they can crew this into a 4/4. Also, it has the ability to pay 2 and tap it for a draw, and you can do that 3 times. So that is draw and attack power out of that card. Okay, and the last utility card I saw, I wasn't sure if people were going to start playing with this card when it came out. A lot of people are hemming and hawing about this, but it is showing up quite a bit in these Grixis Midrange, so I definitely want to talk about it. So Gix Command, this is a 5 cost, which is pretty expensive, but it is a sorcery. What's good about it, though, is there are 4 options here, and you get to choose 2. So first option is to put 2 1/1 counters on up to 1 creature. It gains lifelink until end of turn, so that could be really nice if you just need the lifelink to be able to hold on. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less. That is a board wipe against weenie decks, something like soldiers, or even mono red potentially. Return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. So if you lost some key creatures that you need, you can pull those back. And each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. And this is really nice for getting rid of that one single threat. This works really well on removing the Phyrexian Fleshgorger. If that is down as a 7/5 Menace lifelink, being able to have that sacrificed without having to target it and take the 7 life, that is really, really handy. So Gix Command, definitely lots of different options and utility there, and you pretty much always get value out of these against your opponents. It is 5 cost, that is the downside to it, but with everything else you have in this deck, you can usually get to turn 5 pretty healthy and pretty safely. Okay, so what are the control aspects of this deck? Some people are running Urtai, Resurrected. This is a 4 cost 3/2, so he does also power up the Bankbuster, which is really nice. This is a legendary creature. You can only have 1. It also has Flash, and it gives you the option to counter a target spell, activate ability, or triggered ability, and the controller draws a card, or destroy another target creature or planeswalker, and its controller draws a card. So no matter what, your opponent is likely drawing a card, but depending on what you're countering and or removing, it could be totally worth it. This also does say activated ability or triggered ability. So that works on things like planewalkers and triggered abilities as part of upkeeps. So there can be some really interesting plays with this. And being only a 4 cost, it is a very powerful counter. Okay, next we have Brotherhood's End. So this is a 3 cost. And it is a sorcery, and you can choose one of the following. You can have it do 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, so basically a board wipe for small creatures, or destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. You can get a lot of value out of this, potentially board wipe everything. Okay, another control card this deck is running is Cut Down. We talked about it earlier. There's just so many things out there that it can hit. Even the Blood Tithe Harvester can be a victim to a Cut Down with only having 3/2. Yeah, so destroy target creature with total power and toughness of 5 or less. So that's the power plus toughness, have to be 5 or less. All right, next we have Make Disappear. This is a 2 cost counter spell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. However, with the casualty, it does allow you to up that to they have to pay 4, basically duplicating the spell. There are stuff that you don't have a problem sacrificing, something like Saheeli's little 1/1s, or if you have a Fable Mirrorbreaker copy out, you sacrificing that is not a big deal at all. Fable or Kiki Jiki, which is the ultimate form of the Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, that can also be done like at instant speed. So you can create a copy on your defense and then sacrifice that copy to empower your Make Disappear. So little combos like that do make this a lot better. In the mono blue deck we looked at earlier that ran Make Disappear, there weren't a lot of good sacrifice targets. Like you're kind of sacrificing your creatures which you need to win the game with. So not the case here. Sacrificing things is not the end, and if it's worth getting the counter out, go for it for sure. All right, next, Go for the Throat. We talked about this one again. This is just like the go-to spot removal. Some people are still running Infernal Grasp, but Go for the Throat doesn't allow you to, or doesn't make you take the 2 life, so it does seem to be better. It will not hit artifacts, unfortunately, but there are only a small number of artifacts out there that are worrisome, and I think that is why this card is run so much. There's always another way to get them. Okay, and lastly is Abrade, and honestly, this right here, destroy target artifact. So that pairs really well with Go for the Throat, because anything Go for the Throat can't hit, Abrade will be able to, since it can just destroy any artifact. So this is an instant that allows you to either do 3 damage to target creature or destroy an artifact, which is really nice. Another little removal. Okay, so these kind of all feel like utility and removal cards. How does this deck win? I mean, aside from making copies and hitting you with 3/3s, there are 2 cards in here that can definitely win you the game. First one being Shieldred of the Apocalypse. We talked about this earlier. This is just extremely valuable card with counters out there and constant removal. It is quite difficult to get rid of this card in this particular deck. So yeah, you could even like potentially put a bunch of counters on it too, and then it's really nasty. So Children could definitely win you the game, and the other card that they're running with this deck is Invoke Despair, which is kind of wild to think that a 3-color deck is running a 4 black card. But there is a ton of black in this deck with only maybe 1 card in here requiring 2 of another color, and so the mana is just stacked where every dual colored card has black on it, so casting this is actually not a problem. Yeah, so Invoke Despair can definitely win you the game because you can have the board pretty clear with all this other utility and just get 6 damage and 3 draw through, and that gives you even more creatures and removal to keep them down and out and help you win the game. Okay, so what are the strengths and weaknesses? So the strengths are it has a ton of answers and a ton of synergies. A lot of these cards work so well together. And with the draw that we have in here and the removal that's in here, and it's kind of creative, it's not super easy to kind of manage all of the different kinds of removal. If you can't hit them with the Mirrorbreaker, Blood Tithe Harvester, you can hit them with Go for Throat or Braid. You may hit them with an Evoke Despair, Cut Down, maybe the board wipe hits them, maybe you just destroy it with Airtie. Like, there's just no way to prepare yourself for all the removal that could come at you. Gix Command as well. Okay, what are the weaknesses? Well, I always say that super aggressive decks have an opportunity in the early game to run over mid-range decks because mid-range are looking to get their synergies going or get enough draw that they have a tempo lead on you. If you can get in there and get enough damage through before they're able to do that, it changes the way they play because now they're on defense and now they're putting everything down on the board to try to stay alive, and they're not actually oppressing you the way that they want to. So being a super aggressive into a mid-range deck does give you a chance. Um, and the other weakness is that it doesn't have as much draw as some of the other mid-range controlled decks out there. There are white, blue, black, and any combination thereof decks that run a ton of draw, almost exclusively draw. We saw even the mono blue tempo has way more draw than this deck. This deck does have it, but you only get the draw of the Corpse Appraiser if there are creatures in the graveyard. Bankbuster will only draw you 3 cards. Invoke Despair has to have a perfect board state to get the draw from. Saheeli, you're only running 1 or 2 of these, and you have to have the board state in a situation where you can't afford to tap your artifacts for the draw. You have to have those artifacts as well. So a lot of things kind of have to be in place for the draw to work here. And so if you lack in the draw against a deck who doesn't lack in draw, you could definitely fall behind. I have seen that a time or two. All right, so that was Grixis Midrange. Okay, lastly, let's talk about some honorable mentions. All right, so there are a ton more decks that I want to put in here, but instead of making a million slides, which I did actually do the last time I did one of these videos, but instead I just kind of threw them together really quick to go over. So we're gonna take a look quickly at Esper Control, Esper Legends, which is just a personal favorite. I think it's a really fun deck. Selesnya Enchantments, which has been around and still performing decently well. And then I have these 3 other ones, Mono White Midrange, which is on the up and up. Definitely seeing a lot more of this, and it does seem very oppressive deck to play against. So I'm excited to see what that comes of that. And then Mardu Angels, I still think that deck is extremely good. I don't see it as much, but I do still think it's viable. And Radkos Midrange is another midrange deck that we're seeing. It makes total sense to see Radkos Midrange since we do see so much red-black splashed into all these mid-range decks. So why not just do black and red? It seems to work sometimes. Okay, so let's fly through Esper Control really quick. Some of the staples in Esper Control are definitely the Wandering Emperor. People are running like 4 of these. It drives me crazy. This is a flash planeswalker. 4 cost, comes in with 3 loyalty counters. Her -2 allows you to exile target tapped creature and gain 2 life. So this is giving you life gain so you can stay in the game if you are being aggressed upon. Also allows you to just completely exile something, so there are no graveyard tricks here. That card is gone. Because it has flash, you can wait till they actually attack or tap it for a mechanic. Something like Kiki Jiki is a really good target on that. Or if they don't think you have anything and they attack with a Shield Dread, hitting a Shield Dread with this feels amazing. Also, she can create you 2/2s and give them counters if she doesn't have anything to tap to exile. So she can create you a little army, as well as the fact that she's really strong removal. All right. Rafine, the Scheming Seer. This is a big card in this deck. It is also in the Esper Legends deck. Big part of that deck as well. This is a 3 cost 1/4. He is flying and ward 1, which just makes him kind of annoying to get rid of. But whenever you attack, target attacking creature gain Connive's X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. And we talked about this before, but Connive is just the ability to draw X number of cards and discard X number of cards. For every card you discard that is not a land, you get to put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So you can even use this on himself, and you can buff him up as a flyer, or if you have other attackers that you're able to get through, putting 1/1 counters on them, cycling through your cards. It fits very nicely into this deck. Okay, next, of course, Shield Dread. We don't need to talk about her again. That's definitely going to be there. Wedding Announcement. This card is really good. We've seen this in a ton of decks, and it is a staple in Esper Control. I've seen people win off just having 3 of these down. So this is a 3 cost enchantment. At once every turn, you get either a 1/1 token or the ability to draw. So if you attacked with 2 creatures, you get to draw. If you don't, you get a 1/1 token at the end of your turn. Once You have done that 3 times. This transforms into a enchantment that says all creatures get +1/+1. So you could have 3 of these out and they're all producing you 1/1s, and then when they all flip, they become 2/2s or 3/3s, depending how many you have these going. And with all the control in Esper, you can kind of just put this down and then control their board state, and it kind of just grows into a little army. So this card is very good and is definitely won games. And then another card we're seeing in Esper Control, and this card is extremely annoying to deal with, is a Sanctuary Warden. This is a 6-drop, so this is a late game card. It's a 5/5 with flying. When she enters the battlefield, she gets 2 shield counters. Whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, you may remove a counter from a creature or planeswalker you control. If you do, draw a card and create a 1/1 green-white citizen creature token. So the shield counters that she comes with can also be removed for this draw. So this is like really nice draw. She also makes you a little tiny little 1/1 army. You could potentially do this on planeswalkers as well, like just plus up your planeswalker and then remove the counter to draw and get all kinds of draw out of her that way. And then the shield counter means if you leave those 2 shield counters on her, they have to have 3 removals or have multiple creatures like hit into her in order to actually kill her off the board. So very strong card late game. Basically, this gets played and you just forfeit unless you have a way to deal with it right away. Okay, and then the last one on here is Dennick. So this is just a 2-drop 2/3 with lifelink. This is like the early game card that's gonna like keep you in. You have a decent block if you gain a little bit of life. When this card does die, you can cast it again as a 3/2 flyer. It has a disturb cost there. Also has a little mechanic. Cards in graveyards can be the targets of spells or abilities. So that shuts down a lot of little graveyard tricks, which we know we love to see. So nice little card there. Okay, quickly through Esper Legends. So Thalia, we talked about that. She is a legend herself. Esper Legends is a deck that has just legendary creatures, like no other enchantments or sorceries. There's like the odd planeswalker maybe, but it's just legendary creatures. So Thalia is a staple there. Jadar, another really strong one. Jadar is going to produce you a 2/2 black zombie every turn, and you can attack with it. Well, it produces you one if you don't have one. It does have Decayed, which means it cannot block, and if you attack with it, it gets sacrificed, but you always get another one back, which is really nice. This works really well with Rafine, who is also in this deck. I don't believe I put it in the list again, just so I'm not duplicated, but both Shieldred and Rafine are also in Esper Legends. And these little 2/2 black zombies are another attacker to buff with Rafine, so that's kind of nice. Adeline, this card is another card that kind of grows into a scary beast. So this is a 3 cost. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. Whenever you attack for each opponent, create a 1/1 creature that is tapped and attacking. So when anybody attacks, including this little 2/2 zombie from Jadar, you get to create a 1/1 human that's attacking. So creating creatures with this also buffs her up. So now, and she has vigilance, so she's very good early. Okay, this card is what makes Esper Legends so cool. This is my favorite card in the deck. So this is a Radkos. He has a 4-cost 3/3. He has Vigilance and Ward 2, so he's pretty annoying to get rid of. I don't really like to risk attacking with him, so the Vigilance doesn't really matter to me. Other zombies you control have Vigilance. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it's a 2/2 zombie. So it also has Vigilance, because all zombies have Vigilance with this card. But this Radkos card allows you to have multiple Shieldreds, multiple Rafines, multiple Thalias. Like, if you have this out and any of those other legendaries are on your board and get removed, you just get a copy and you could potentially play another one. It's kind of wild. I've actually had this out and had a Shieldred out and played another Shieldred, which forced me to kill the one. And then I just got a little token for that one. And then I got another one out. And I literally had 2 Shieldreds on the board. Like, it's ridiculous. So, Radkos, insanely good. Alright, Lisa, the Forgotten Archangel. This card is insanely good. It is a 5-drop 4/5 flying lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If your creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead. So this is another thing that removes the ability to have the graveyard tricks. It also counters Radkos if you are playing a mirror matchup, because they uh, would not die. They actually go into exile, so it doesn't allow Radkos to trigger. And then she herself is flying on lifelink, so that's insanely good as well. All right, and last card is Ao, the Dawn Sky. I've definitely talked about this before. I do believe people run this in some mono white decks as well, just because it's so good. So he has a 5/4 for 5 cost. He has flying and vigilance, which is really strong, especially since he's 5 power up in the air. When Ao, the Dawn Sky, dies, choose one of the following. Look at the top 7 cards of your library and put any number of non-land permanent cards with a total manual value of 4 or less. So you could put like 2/2/2s, or a 1-drop and a 3-drop, or just a 4-drop. Like the mana cost has a total 4. It does nicely hit Rafines and Shieldreds and Ratadrabix, so that's really nice. Lisa and Ao are the only ones that basically can't hit in the deck. And then the other option is put 2 1/1 counters on each permanent you control. That's a creature or a vehicle. No vehicles in this deck, but I'm not super likely to do the 2 counters down, but if it actually is a win con, if putting 2 1/1 counters on each permanent and having the swing there is going to win the game, that is definitely an option, which is really nice. All right, Esper Legends. So basically all the good legendaries in one deck. It's really fun. Okay. Selesnya Enchantments. So we have the Generous Visitor. We've definitely talked about this deck before. I'm going to go really quick. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So this just gets buffed up from all the other things you're going to cast. Kami of the Transients is the same idea. It is a 2/2 for 2 with trample. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a 1/1 counter on him. So the Generous Visitor allows you to put a 1/1 counter on anybody, and the Kami gets a 1/1 counter on himself, but both get to buff from whenever an enchantment spells come in. Another annoying thing about Kami is if an enchantment is ever removed or killed from your battlefield, you can put Kami back in your hand from the graveyard. So if you lose her and then you lose something else, you just get her back. So kind of annoying. This is one of those cards that people want to remove or exile or pull out of the graveyard so that she can be reanimated in that way. The Jukai Naturalist. This card is an enchantment creature, 2 cost 2/2 with lifelink. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less. She kind of makes the deck because all your enchantment spells are cheaper, and she herself is an enchantment, so she buffs all this other stuff up. The Weaver of Harmony, another enchantment creature. So these would all trigger Kami and the Visitor to get counters. You can also get the discount on him from the Naturalist, so this could potentially be a 1-drop for a 2/2. Other enchantment creatures you control get +1/+1, so that would apply to the Naturalist and unfortunately not to our spirits. The Visitor and the Transients are both spirits and not actually enchantments. But the Jukai Naturalist would get +1 from them. There are a couple other things like the Spirited Companion, the dog that lets you draw. Those would all get 1/1. But what makes this card so good is the tapped ability. You can pay 1 green mana and tap this and copy target activated or triggered ability you control from an enchantment source. You may choose new targets for the copy. So what I see the most commonly done here is people will cast a removal, like an enchantment that allows you to exile target permanent, and then copy it. And now they have removed 2 permanents with 1 exile card. Incredibly good. Also, I believe it's in here. Catilda. Miko's Reign of Truth. This is a triggered ability that puts 1/1. Target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and enchantment you control. You could also copy that with the Weaver of Harmony and make your Kami, which is a trample card, potentially be huge. If you're copying the Reign of Truth going out, you could put like 20 +20/+20 on that thing and attack, and it has trample. So the Weaver of Harmony is definitely insanely good. Okay, the other card I put in here is the Catilda Dawnheart Martyr. So this is a 3 cost. She's a legendary spirit warlock. She has flying, lifelink, and protection from vampires, which doesn't actually come in handy that much. There are some vampires out there, but I don't see her getting the value from the protection from vampires. However, her power and toughness are equal to the number of permanents you control that are spirits or enchantments. So both the Generous Visitor and Kami of the Transients are both spirits, so they would actually buff her up. And if she dies, which she's likely to die because she's flying and lifelink and huge, you can play the disturb cost of 5 to give all of those things as an enchantment to one of these creatures. So you could, excuse me, potentially put this on Cammy, and Cammy now has lifelink and protection and plus whatever, depending on what that is. So both the original cast and being able to pull this out for a disturb cost are very dangerous. You could definitely win the game off that. Another card people are going to target out of your graveyard with all the graveyard anti-graveyard tricks we've seen to make sure that you can't disturb that and have another round of lifelink flying that they have to deal with. And then Miko's Reign of Truth is another card. We kind of looked at it earlier, but allows you to buff up your enchantment creatures or your creatures based on your enchantments and artifacts. I don't know if there's any artifacts in here. I don't think there are. Also, it becomes a creature once it hits the 3rd saga level that its power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts and enchantments you control. So again, it could be a potentially really buffed up creature in this deck. Okay, those were our honorable mentions. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I am really looking forward to another year of Magic with you. So, to 2023. Thanks so much.